Next call for her comes from Philadelphia. Philadelphia, you're on the air.
Hello, Ms. Prins and Ms. Lenz. I just wanted to react to a program that I watched last night, and I would encourage you to check it out. Bill Moyer's Journal. It comes on every week. You may or may not know that he's going to retire from the program as of next week. Well, he had William Black on, the author of Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. And he was reacting to testimony given by Geithner on August 10th for Congress, where they were talking about the financial crisis, some of the bank regulations. And during his testimony, Geithner stated that during the time that all this was blowing up, with AIG and Goldman and what have you, that Fed, the New York Fed, and the other central banks had no authority under the law to limit risk-taking amongst all these entities, and that essentially they were toothless. How frustrating they were. And also, Ms. Shapiro, the head of the SEC, testified on the same day, April 10th, and also expressed her frustration at why the SEC could not do more. And when asked to react to that, Mr. Black said that, well, the reason why they couldn't do a lot of the things that they were unable to do to curtail this fiasco was because the Fed had lobbied to repeal Glass-Steagall. So they, in fact, were the architects of disarming themselves, taking the tools out of the toolbox, so to speak, and then going to Congress and saying that we had no way of stopping this because we didn't have enough tools. I was just wondering.
Right, thanks, caller. Nomi Prins.
Yeah, well, I think that you're right. You're pointing to a real disingenuous kind of component of the whole argument on both sides. Yes, Glass-Steagall was repealed in 1999. That allowed big banks to both take depositor money, deal with creating loans, and also bet. Betting requires, speculative trading requires putting capital behind it. You can choose where you put that capital, and you still can. So if a bank decides, you know what, instead of putting capital behind creating or renegotiating new loans with individuals, we want to put capital against betting on packages of subprime loans, or on betting on oil or food or whatever else we want to bet on, that's just a choice. We will move it there. The New York Fed has a very close connection to Wall Street. It is Wall Street's Fed, and the Federal Reserve, of course, has the ability to see information as this stuff is coming to a head. They also had information about what was going on with the subprime loans underlying what became all these toxic assets. It was obvious between 2006 and 2007 that foreclosures were doubling, that these securities were having a problem, that ratings were going to be, as disingenuous as they are, were going to come down on these securities. And your responsibility as the regulatory enforcer of the banking industry is to not sit there on your hands and say, I can't do something. That wasn't the decision that was made when the bailout decision was taken. There wasn't a we can't do anything. There was more like a here's some cheap loans and here's some money and here's some other stuff to get you through the day. And so there are emergency powers acts within the emergency powers within the Federal Reserve Act that allow the Fed to do whatever it needs to do to promote economic stability. And if it sees that there are information lacking or non-transparencies or whatever it might be coming from the banking sector, it is their job to take a look at that stuff. And they just failed at that job. The SEC failed at its job. The SEC allowed the risk-taking, the leverage, the betting against these types of securities and others to accumulate from 2004 when they changed the rules to allow that to happen. When you change your rules to allow something to get more risky and then you don't watch it as it becomes more risky, that's a failure on the part of the regulatory body. So they contribute to their own failure, but then they fail in executing their defense against what they contributed. I mean, so it's a bad cycle.
And you call in It Takes a Pillage, you say that the repeal of Glass-Steagall was one of the biggest mistakes ever made. Why?
Because it allowed banks to both have the benefit of having FDIC backing and have their deposits backed and have that capital assurance, that cushion, in order to go off into other areas and bet more. And what was happening, I should talk about this in my first book, and Other People's Money, is that they're unleashed after Glass-Steagall was repealed this really big competitiveness within the banking industry. There was banks like JP Morgan Chase and like Citigroup that were full combinations of investment banks, the speculative banks, and commercial banks that deal with customers and sort of more vanilla loans and deposits. And then you have the Goldman Sachs and the Lehman Brothers and the Bear Stearns and the Merrill Lynch. We're like, okay, we don't have those deposits, so instead we're going to leverage or borrow against what we do have by much more so we can compete with these bigger banks. So even though they weren't combined post-Glass-Steagall banks, investment and commercial together, they were just investment for a while, the competition against what was going on with the new kind of commercial investment banks post-Glass-Steagall drove up all of the risk in the market. And right now, again, the bills that are put forth so far in Congress don't actually repeal the repeal of Glass-Steagall. There are some senators that have produced amendments to want to try to do that, but so far they are not and have not been put into these bills.
What would you like to see in a reform package passed by the Congress?
Well, yeah. First and foremost, we should have a repeal of Glass-Steagall repeal. We should go back to...
That's not even under consideration, is it?
Again, yeah, it's under consideration by some senators and some House representatives. But the thing is, what is under consideration instead, which they are saying, many senators are saying will be the helpful thing, and so is Tim Geithner and so is the Fed chairman, that if we just increase the capital that banks have to put behind, reduce the risk that way, but don't segment them out into Glass-Steagall type of separations, it will be okay. But it won't be okay. That'll just take money away from lending and put it into speculation. They'll still make that choice. It will just hurt the other side of the economy more.
Nomi Prins has been our guest for the last half hour. This is her most recent book, It Takes a Pillage. And in fact, if you would like to see more of Nomi Prins, she taped an afterwards program with us. She sat down with Senator Bernie Sanders last year and taped an afterwards. So you can go to booktv.org. You can just search her name and come up with all the programs, and you can watch it all online at booktv.org. Nomi Prins, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.